chapter 8. As far as I can remember, we had two outstanding questions. They were outstanding in every sense of the word, and they are outstanding. We have yet to answer whether or not the Deuteronomy chapter 17 was simply a prophecy that there would be a king, or if it was God's endorsement or part of his plan that there would be a king in Israel. And then the second question I think that we still have yet to answer was whether or not it was or how it was wrong or sinful for Israel to ask Samuel for a king in 2 Samuel chapter 8. Am I right? Is that what we had left to answer, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So I'd like to answer those, but I would like to answer them as we move through the chapter. So last week I threw it open to anybody that wanted to have anything that they had thought about while they were preparing, and so that invitation remains the same today, but we'll just bring it out after each section. So let's read the first 5 verses. Let's read the first 5 verses of chapter 8. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So what... And I think I said this 2 weeks ago, that this is one of the hardest chapters in Samuel to really understand what is being taught, what's being, what the problem was, exactly where the people's thought was, and, to tie it all together with all the rest of the predictions of prophecies of kings, and we look at David. So I think there is some... I think if we leave with some tension in our thinking as to what exactly was going on here, that's okay. It's okay with me. I don't think we have to tie everything into perfect little knots and tie up every single loose end. So what was the problem with Samuel, and why did the elders of Israel go to Samuel? Was it wrong? We said this, I think, last week. Was it wrong that Samuel appointed his sons to be judges? And the answer we said was yes. We said it was wrong. So why did the elders then of Israel go to Samuel and demand a king of Samuel?
He was the boss man. He was the leader, wasn't he? Who else was they going to go to?
Yeah, but there was no other judge that functioned in a way that would appoint or establish a government.
No, that's true. But who else would do it, though?
Well, somebody answer. Who else would do it? God would do it. So rather than...
Yeah, God would do it, but did he use people?
No. When God appointed the judge, he just appointed the judge. There was no succession in judges.
Yeah, but we're talking about a king.
God established what? He established the priesthood, which included the Levites. He established the prophets. He established the judges. So he didn't have any problem instituting new offices or forms of government in Israel. So why didn't the people go to the Lord then? And that's the question. Why didn't they go to the Lord to establish a king rather than going to Samuel? Or why did they go to Samuel? Well, he established a dynastic judgeship. That's why they went to him. Apparently, they assumed that he had the authority to establish a government in Israel. And that's exactly what he did, right? When he appointed his sons to be judges, it was either going to be their sons after them that were going to continue to be judges, or his sons were going to appoint someone else in some other family or some other person to be a judge. So the entirety of this first part of the chapter points to the fact that Samuel was just totally out of line with where God had intended for the nation to be, and how he intended to establish a dynasty in Israel, if that was his intention. He eventually did that with David. It was David's family that was going to, and only David's family that was supposed to be kings in Israel. So, what's the lesson for us there? Well, it's really important that we, especially when it comes to any kind of an exercise of authority, that we do so under the authority that God has given. So if God had said to Samuel, appoint your sons, it would have been fine. He should have made that public. God has told me to appoint my sons to be judges. It's not my authority that I'm doing this. I'm doing what God has instructed me to do. Now, I think that's one. The lesson there also, in understanding this whole chapter and really this whole time in Judges, is that who was judging Israel? Was it Samuel that was judging? Was it Barak who was judging?
It was always God judging.
Okay. So, behind the judge, all the judge or the prophet, the priest, all that they were doing was vocalizing the voice of God. Whether they had gotten that in their scripture or they had received a revelation directly from God, it was always God that was speaking to the people. Samuel went around that, and so the people came to Samuel to go around God to establish a king in Israel. That's my take on this first part, these first 5 verses. Anybody want to comment on that? Disagree?
So,
Bring something else out.
I guess you were just saying Samuel was acting, corruptly or not obeying the Lord. So, I guess the people maybe thought that was like the new normal or something, or
It's possible.
maybe they wouldn't have been so, apt to ask him for a king if he didn't appoint his sons.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they would have or wouldn't have. I'm saying he gave the opportunity in doing what he did.
I think it's interesting that Eli's sons were bad, and then it's like, did Samuel not remember or learn anything from that? And then he kind of does the same thing, like just appoints his sons. Why? Just because they're his son? Surely he knew they weren't walking in his ways. So it's just
Yeah.
interesting.
Yes, it is. All right, then let's read this next section, starting in verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel. The people asking for a king displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. I think that's really interesting too. They don't say give us a king to rule us. They say give us a king to judge us. And we saw that a lot of the judges, they kind of looked like kings in what they did. But it's interesting that they would phrase it in that way. And that's why I think Samuel took it as a rejection of him, and that's why it was a rejection of him but it was a rejection of the Lord more than that. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. So, what was wrong with the request? Have we come to a conclusion there?
Was not following the way that God established appointing judges or forms of government up to that point.
Say that again.
So I said it wasn't the modus operandi that had happened up until that point. It
Okay.
always been God appointing the judges, God appointing Abraham, Moses, all of the people before, but now it's reversed because Samuel appointed his sons without confirming or asking God what he should do, even though he was established by God himself, not following even the way he had been established. But now the people were like, oh, Samuel appointed himself or his sons. I guess that's what we need to do.
Okay, so that is, and that's right. That's one reason. They didn't go to God. They didn't even ask Samuel to go to God and see if this was the time to establish a king in Israel. They just went and demanded of Samuel that he appoint a king. What else?
Well, they wanted a king like all the nations. They didn't want a godly king. They didn't want a king that God would choose. They just wanted to be like everybody else.
So what does that tell us about them?
Their hearts were far from the Lord.
He said their hearts were far from the Lord. That's true. God calls us to be set apart and holy, right? We're to be a set apart people, set apart for the work of the Lord. And that puts us at odds with what? 90%, 95% of the people that we come in contact with every day. We are the weirdos in the eyes of the world. And that is uncomfortable a lot of times. Everybody at your place of work, they want to celebrate whatever, and this is how we're going to celebrate it. And you have to say, yeah, I'm not interested in that at all. That's not fun. I won't be there. And then what? They all look at you like you've got two heads, or what's wrong with you? There's this underlying need or feeling that we all have from time to time to just be normal, to just not stand out. We don't want to. I used to hate it when we would go to these family camps and you had to sit around in a circle and introduce yourself to a bunch of strangers. For one thing, I couldn't remember anybody else's name, and it didn't really matter to me that this person was however old or whatever. You just kind of want to go along and do your thing. Maybe that's necessary, whatever. I'm just saying, it's when you're in a crowd, what? Unless you're dying to be the center of attention, you just kind of want to get along with everybody and just kind of meld into the crowd and not stick out like a sore thumb. But that's not possible for Christians. You're going to stick out like a sore thumb if you're going to faithfully follow the Lord. There's no question about that. Israel was very uncomfortable with that, apparently. We want to be like everybody else. Here we are in the middle of Canaan, and we got all these kings around us, and they all these different kinds of governments. Can we just be like them? Can we just not stick out like a sore thumb amongst all the rest of the people in the world? So that's why we know that their heart was far from the Lord. They weren't willing to stand there and bear the ire of everybody around them. They were tired of it. They were tired of God. We want to be done with that. We just want to be like everybody else. What else? Well, is there any kind of did anybody get any sense of a request here? Did they ask Samuel, would you make us a king? They just demanded it. Well, it's like the spoiled little kid. Give us a king. We want a king. And that's just what that's what my Bible says. Does anybody's Bible give them any indication that they were making a request of Samuel? No. So, nowhere in all of Scripture is there anyone that makes any kind of a demand upon God or upon his prophet on the scene. You don't get to demand of God. We don't, he doesn't, and nobody in history or in the future ever will make demands of God. But they didn't seem to have, the audacity of the whole thing. And God, what does he say? This is just in line with everything that you've done since I brought you out of Egypt. Just like every other time. You're leaving me for another God. And then in their demand was that they wanted it now. Not only are we demanding this king, but we're demanding him now. So, again, it's really... Whether or not God intended to bring kingship to Israel is beside the point entirely here, because the way that they went about making their demands and what they wanted made made it really impossible for God to bring kingship the way that he intended at this time. Now, what happens if you've read the rest of Samuel is God does recapture or take over the whole timeline of kingship in Israel, and he begins working then to bring David into the palace in Jerusalem, if you want to use that kind of language. God does take it back over. He says, I'm giving you what you want, but now I'm going to go about and I'm going to work out kingship in Israel the way that I want and with the king that I've selected. So, but he does give them what they wanted. What do you guys make of that? If this wasn't God's timing, then why did God give them the king that they demanded?
He was giving them the desire, giving them over to the desires of the heart.
Well, he granted them their desire, but why?
So they can know what comes along with like an earthly king.
So they could bear the consequences of it. That seems to be, and then later on he says in verse 18, you'll cry out in that day because of your king which you have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you on that day. So, what's the lesson there for us?
What we want for ourselves may not, yeah.
Okay.
I guess,
All right. So, we can ask the Lord for whatever's on our heart, as long as our heart is and our motive is right in the thing. That's fine. But we accept the Lord's answer of no, not at this time, maybe no, not ever, because it's better for us to be there than to get what we want and then have to bear the consequences of that. So we ought to remember that in our prayers and just in the way that we check our desires. All right, then anybody else want to say anything there before we move on? All right, then in verse 9, now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself. I'm not going to read that all. What did you guys think about then? All that. What do you think about what's Samuel saying? Are these the signs of a bad king?
No, they're just the signs of a king.
Okay. So it's not that this king is going to be particularly wicked because he's going to take your sons and your daughters and your land and your riches and you're going to have to pay him taxes. That's just that's what a king is. Samuel's just giving a definition of a king. Now, undoubtedly, those things can be and were, even by Saul, abused. And he went beyond what was normal or needed. But the way of the king is that everything in the kingdom belongs to the king. That includes people, servants, cattle, land, everything. There's a certain maintenance that goes along with having any kind of a government. So Samuel's not saying taxes are necessarily evil. Taxes you have to pay to maintain whatever the government that you have. Expect that. Now, they didn't have to pay to maintain a government except for in the sacrifices that the priests and the Levites took. So they had it pretty good as far as their money went. And the people, the elders that came to them, undoubtedly, those were probably the wealthiest people, had the best lands, had the most servants. They were the ones that stood to lose the most by appointing this king, or by having a king to rule over them. What does that tell us? Samuel goes through all this. He teaches them. He teaches them what it's going to mean to be a king, and they say what? Okay, yeah, well, that's what we want. So what does that tell us? What does that tell us about education?
It's not the answer.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you're still waffling between an educated or an uneducated populace, which one is more able to honor the Lord, you're barking up the wrong tree. If you're wondering if it's an educated or an uneducated person that's able to make good decisions, the answer is it doesn't have any bearing on the subject at all. You can teach a stupid person everything that they need to know. They're not going to apply then that knowledge into so that they can make good decisions. Now, I'm not dismissing, I'm not saying that education is a bad thing. I'm saying that education is not the answer to bad decisions. You can educate someone as much as you want, but it's not going to make them make good decisions. It's not going to make them make decisions that honor the Lord. The solution in Israel was not that these people just needed to be educated. So then why did God educate them? So they'd be without excuse. There's something that ought to be horrifying to us in that. Here we have the only revelation of God that is ever going to be had, and living in our time, we have it in more abundance than any other generation has ever had it. We are the privileged generation. If we want to know what God thinks about any given subject, we have His Bible, and we have countless books by countless godly men. Now, we go beyond that. We can find all kinds of ungodly men that have written all kinds of things. But we can fill our bookshelves with books written by men who were submitted to the Lord. I don't understand this passage. I can find 5 or 6 different godly men who have lived godly lives, and they can teach me what I need to know. So what ought to be the most godly people that have ever lived? Liz? Us. I mean, would somebody want to take the other side and argue against that? So then as we go about our days evaluating ourselves, let's not give ourselves a pass. I guess that's what I'm saying. Let's not chalk it up to technology. Well, no other generation had Facebook. So we're definitely at a disadvantage. Let's just reckon with the truth of the matter that we have more opportunity to know God and to understand His Word than any group of people that have ever lived on the face of the earth. It didn't do Israel any good. It ought to do us good. All right, what does that tell us about government? Anybody want to make an application there?
It's all bad all the time.
Well, what is the form of government the problem?
No, it's the people running the government.
Okay, and what's going to differentiate between a good government and a bad government?
Those who run it,
In what way?
where their hearts are.
Well, let's be specific. Let's say I've got two democracies. How am I going to know which one is a good government?
One that honors God.
Okay, maybe they both do. What about, now we could say communism in some sense. What if you had a communist leader who was, or a dictator, who was a Christian? Would that be impossible to live under that form of government?
I don't know, does he kill you if you're not a Christian?
I mean, it's not impossible to live like that.
Okay,
Because you're saying he's a real Christian.
yeah. Is there any other kind? So it's not the form of government, it's who's running the government that's the problem. They had judges, and as long as they followed the judge, they did fine. They had a king, and as long as the king was following the Lord, everything was fine. They had Moses, and they lived under Moses, and as long as they did what Moses told them to do, everything was great. So, whatever the form of government, as long as it's the Lord who is ruling and the government is voicing the word of the Lord to the people, then everything is great. All right, anybody want to say anything there?
Was there anything different in that it's a monarchy versus the government we have?
Is there anything different between a monarchy and the government that we have? Is that the question?
And about what we're talking about.
Well, he just said it's not the form of government or the government itself, it's the people running the government, whether it's a monarchy or a democracy.
Yeah, but I just hate when people say that.
Okay.
It's the government that's our problem. It's like, no, you're the problem. Like, you're in a democracy, you can vote for different people. Like, it's a relatively free country. People just complain about. It's like, you're not living in Soviet Russia or like some, completely bad place. Anyway. Well, I'm just saying, like, we get to participate in our government.
We do get to participate.
Yeah, it's not like an authoritarian king. So anyway, maybe having godly people running our government would be good, but also maybe having a godly voting base would also be, I guess, particularly good in a place that gets to vote.
In a democracy, the rulers reflect the people. Maybe in a monarchy, the people reflect the ruler. That's what we see in Israel. But they are one and the same as far as their godliness or their ungodliness, as a general rule. Okay, now we just need to come to a decision on whether or not I guess we don't have to. We're giving an opportunity to come to a decision on whether or not the Deuteronomy 17 passage was predictive or indicative of that kingship was eventually in God's plan for Israel. My answer is that it was always in God's plan for Israel, but it was going to be in His time and in His way and His king. And I think this passage in Samuel violates all of that. Does anybody want to disagree with that and voice your opinion as to why?
So are you, a couple times, are you implying that God's king is David?
Well, that was God's anointed king, yeah. Is there a question about that?
No. Well, I just was trying to understand why this was not part of God's plan, like the whole kingship of Israel, like after this was just not, or
This wasn't God's time.
just a contrast between Saul and David.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that this wasn't God's time. This was Israel's time. They demanded a king, and they demanded it now, and they demanded the man that they wanted. A man that would lead them out into battle and rule over them in place of God and replacing Samuel.
I have a question for you though. David didn't let them kill Saul because he was God's anointed. And then he killed the guy who killed Saul because he was God's anointed. So it must have been legit that, he was God's anointed.
He was.
God, David treated as such.
Yeah. Saul wasn't God's choice. He was anointed by God. He was the people's choice. God told Samuel, give them what they want.
Oh, I feel like I get kind of confused on all this stuff because if it wasn't God's choice, God would have let him king.
Well, we said why God allowed it. We said why God gave it to him.
So they could bear the consequences.
So they could bear the consequences, and so he could bring his king then in stark contrast to Israel's choice for a king. And David was a stark contrast most of the time from Saul. And he was always contrasted in the sense that he was a man after God's own heart. But that didn't make Saul something to be scoffed at. God, when they installed Saul as king, it was by Samuel, who was God's prophet, according to God's instruction. So he was there under the authority of God. So you couldn't dismiss him as less than that, ever. And David did. That's it. I mean, if you see the contrast between David, here Saul is king. David's been anointed as king, right? And then what does David do? He just waits for God's time. He waited, how many years was it? Years he waited. Hiding in caves, running here and running there, always in fear of his life, having opportunity to help Israel, he did. Having opportunity to kill Saul, he didn't. He just waited until God's timing. That's totally in contrast to what Israel did. Israel said, we want a king, and we want him now, and we want to get to choose him. right then, this may be the biggest and hardest lesson for us to learn. If God eventually wanted to have kingship in Israel, Israel asked or demanded for a king. So they were asking or demanding what God was intending to give them eventually. But their motive was totally wrong in the whole thing. That's very subtle. I mean, hopefully we can see that in our own lives. I want this good thing. I want this thing that God says He wants for me. But why do I want it? And am I willing to wait God's time for it? Now that's hard. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is such a hard chapter. So, we have another opportunity then to check ourselves. Even in the things that God says, these are good things. Even in the promises of God, we await His timing in the thing. He said He's going to give me food, but I'm hungry right now. Now, none of us is hungry, I don't think. If you are, get with me after the meeting. But it's an easy demonstration. God promises, and there's Christians that have starved to death. God's timing. God fulfills His promises in His time. And we don't have the right to demand of God that God meet our timeline in anything. And if our heart is anywhere other than just submitted to the Lord and patiently waiting for His time for this thing to come into my life, then we are on the wrong track. And that is hard. All right, anybody else want to say anything else, make an application for us? Or bring something else out? Or else next week we're going to go on to chapter 9.
I have a question.
All right.
So, like I guess verses 10 through 18, when it's talking about taking their land, and I guess at the end, it's like, and you shall be as slaves, and in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So, I guess it sounded like we were saying these things are inherently bad, but then, you could abuse them, like if Saul was your king, or... So, I guess it doesn't say, I don't know, it doesn't make it sound like this king is abusing his powers or anything. It just sounds like, these are just sort of facts, right? Like he takes your lands. That's just part of, if you want a monarchy, then this is just what's going to have to happen. So, are you saying that's a bad thing, or are you saying that abusing, are you saying that system is a bad thing, or abusing that system is a bad thing?
The abuse is a bad thing.
Okay. Well, I guess I just don't see that in the text.
What?
Well, it's just.
I'm not saying they're crying out because of the abuse. They're going to suffer abuse.
Right.
They're going to suffer all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't have suffered if they waited God's time. And when they cry out, and whatever distress that is, it's going to be because they demanded their king. And God's not going to hear it. You understand what I'm saying? You're disagreeing with what I'm saying.
I guess maybe I'm trying to better understand what you're saying.
There's going to come a time when Israel is going to regret making this demand of God. And when they cry out to God in that day, God's not going to hear them. That's what That's what the text says.
Wait, and when is that day?
Well, I guess we'll have to read the rest of our Bible and we'll find it, won't we? I mean, if you've ever read Kings, Chronicles, no doubt you'll find wicked kings and suffering people.
So, Saul was the first king. Or I don't, do we say Saul was the first king or David was the first king?
Saul was the first king.
Okay. But is this description of the monarchy, is that true throughout the whole, whether it's Saul or David or anybody after them?
It's true, no matter who the king is.
So it was kind of the same system then?
And it king, when
Like
the
the
king,
system that Israel demanded, not the way that God wanted to set it up.
Samuel is describing what a king is. In Israel, in Egypt, in England, this is what a king is. In Saudi Arabia, in our day. He's just describing what a king is and what he owns. Well, get with me afterwards. Okay?
Okay.
Anybody else?